Thanks, Joe. Morning, everybody. Okay, you've all read the biog, so I'll skip through that. And I think a lot of the approach that we have at Creative Tourist has been echoed in the speakers already. Buzzword of the day is probably partnership, and I'll try and keep that word down to a minimum, but it is absolutely at the heart of what we try and do. It's around sharing goals, understanding, and sharing ambition, and then we can get to the resources. And it's about focusing on that long-term prize, not expediency, not short-termism, not what we can't do, not what we haven't been able to do because that's the way it's always been done. So it's finding new ways to think, and I think there's a lot of thinking, a lot of good brain power in the room, and we'll be exploiting that over the next day and a half or so. So these are just a few of the places that we work. And when I was talking to Matt a few months ago, we were saying, well, if we can find a case study, an example that might actually fit the bill, that has some relevance as a comparator, then let's find that. So I started rattling through a few. So it's all Matt's fault. And we settled on one. So out of all of those, pays your money, takes your choice. We all want to learn from great examples, and we can learn from some terrible examples as well. So I had to pick one, had to think about it, but one came to the fore. So out of all of those, we chose Halifax. Maybe not the most obvious, modest little market town, not so little, market town in the Pennines in West Yorkshire. And in doing so, we raised quite a few questions through that process, and it was a process that we were involved in. I was part of the business planning team for a particular heritage project, a renewal project that is the focus of really what I'm going to talk about. And that's the Peace Hall. Quick show of hands, who's familiar with, who knows of the Peace Hall? A few heritage people, a few other people, thank you. It's an amazing building. It's one of those pieces of heritage, like so many, like possibly the walls here at some point, that can become and did become wallpaper. It became invisible to locals, and if it's invisible to locals, it's invisible to everybody. It was once described as a really small building with a really big footprint. And the reason for that is it was, in effect, the town's market square, surrounded by a wall within which were lots of small rooms, which were trading rooms. And those trading rooms were for cloth. It was the wool trade. And the Peace Hall became symbolic of 8 centuries of the wool trade. And 30-yard pieces, hence Peace Hall, 30-yard pieces of textile were traded in 315 rooms from 1779. But it was also a civic centre. It was also a place of gathering. And one of the images up there is for the original royal visit when it was opened. It was subsequently reopened by a slightly later edition of the Prince of Wales, but nevertheless the continuity was there. Peace Hall, as a heritage site, as I say, was right at the heart of the town. But the trading of textiles lasted 3 decades. So they've had 200 years to think about what happens next. And it's taken about 200 years to resolve it. So if you're talking about 400 years of the walls and moving forward in Derry, you've got a little bit more thinking time than even Halifax. So it opened, it was ambitious, but over time it fell not into complete disrepair, but it wasn't used, it wasn't animated, it wasn't activated. Things weren't happening there. It became a commuter cut-through from the station to the offices in the centre of town. It had a few events, Christmas lights switch on, but not too much else. And yet it was a civic masterpiece. It's rated by Historic England as the second most important building after York Minster in Yorkshire. But it became a problem, not an asset. So after the textile trade went, lots of other things happened. And some of those images you can see, markets, rallies, emptiness. So in the 1960s, mid-60s, nobody in Halifax seems to be able to tell me the dates. They're probably too scarred. It came one vote away in council chambers from being demolished. And it was the last of the peace halls. It was the largest and the grandest, but it was the last. All the others had been razed to the ground by forward-thinking local authorities in the previous decades. So it came very, very close. So how to create a primary role for a primary heritage asset? And the short answer was to activate it. Bring the stories together. So that's quite a nice view and a context within the town itself. In front of it is Square Spire. That's all left. What's left of a church. Next to that is a brand new library. The other side is the Square Chapel, which is an arts centre. But there's still plenty of evidence of not especially forward-thinking planning down the years. If you go from the spire to the right to the library, then there's an industrial museum which won awards and then closed and is now run by volunteers. And next to that is a Burger King. Imagine putting a Burger King that close to York Minster. I can't think of it, but there you go. So, how can visitors be attracted? And the asterisk is important because visitors are existing visitors, lapsed visitors, new visitors, people visiting local residents, and people who have never been before and might not even have any awareness. So, what's happened? Well, all of this has sort of happened, and this paints a picture. You can see it in some of the high street and historic quarter examples that Stephanie was talking about. Pretty much none of this was there. You'll notice wine and gin's in twice, but that's the world we live in. Blame millennials for that. But that combined to turn a static heritage attraction into something else. So what are the questions that Halifax asked itself and Calderdale asked itself to be able to redress that? And we're talking about at least 12 to 15 years work on this. So the extra little bit of activation in the middle, bringing culture and heritage together, bringing voices in. And when the major event strategy was being developed, what they did was to get new voices in, people who didn't even know the town, who were doing great things in the Lake District, great things in Liverpool, Manchester, London, and elsewhere, and go, come and look at this. They walk in, they go, wow, and then they don't say wow the second time. They start to think about what you can do within a space like that, who you want to work with in a space like that. And that creativity is absolutely critical. And lots of coffee. There's probably about 7 places that you can buy slightly expensive coffee now in and around the Peace Hall. But it's part of that wraparound. It's part of that wraparound offer. It's not the best marker for regeneration, but unfortunately it is one. So, massively significant, important heritage asset, but who can come in? So it's those external voices blending with the internal voices and that knowledge to make it happen. So ask yourself, who are your activists? Building momentum through a number of different areas. I'll just give you a couple of examples of the kind of thing that happened in and around the Peace Hall. And around the Peace Hall is important. There always used to be culture or heritage quarter brown signs up on the way into and around the town, and it's quite easy to put those signs up. It's better to actually create the quarter first, and that's now what is happening. And lo and behold, you don't really need the brown signs at all because people will learn about the assets. So they took the heritage as a starting point, but took the stories as the starting point, the inspiration. So you'll find one of those coffee shops, which is called Blondin. And Blondin, the French acrobat, did a tightrope walk across from one side of the Peace Hall to the other, and that was recreated only a few weeks ago. Absolutely packed, fantastic. So heritage is woven back into the full visitor journey and that visitor experience. But there were some sacred cows to slay, some heritage sacred cows, and the focus of the heritage had to be decided. It's a Georgian building, it's a Georgian story. Yorkshire cobbles were ripped up, much to some local people's upset, mainly the people who worked in the stone quarries. But fresh content was needed to engage, fresh tone of voice to appeal to the new visitor types, the millennials, etc., that we've heard about. And fresh itineraries to actually tie all that together. So there's a lot of work on content rather than just preservation and conservation. And this meant that heritage quarter started to mean something again, and people could see what it was. So the heritage side is particularly important. So how hard can that heritage work? What can the walls here do? Well, I'll show you some examples of what they've done in Halifax. We've also already heard about the balance between visitors and locals, yin and yang, and if the local population do not appreciate what visitors do and how they contribute and the stimulus that provides, then you're not going to get anywhere. So the pride is very, very important. If people came to Halifax, visiting friends and relatives, they didn't really go to the Peace Hall. They might have walked through the Peace Hall, but then they went on somewhere else. Now they stop, and the stickability of this place has been absolutely, absolutely transformed. So music is an obvious one. Everybody can stage a concert. A big stage can fit pretty much anywhere. But ask yourself, if you want to see your favourite band or your favourite artist, do you want to see it in a sweaty venue? Do you want to see it in the usual places, or do you want to see it in a historic setting? Do you want to see it in somewhere where you can get a richer, deeper experience? And that's certainly what's happening. This is a concert featuring an Ivor Novello winner, Grammy Award nominated artist, absolutely packed. So, around culture, people within the heritage sector discovered that there was culture, discovered that there were theatre companies, that there were creative industry there. Just over the road is Eureka, National Museum for Children, the Square Chapel Arts Centre, I've already mentioned. They've had their own capital project as well. One capital project encourages another capital project. And Eureka are at it as well now. So they've asked themselves, what sort of stuff do we do? What are we offering that nowhere else is offering? And that bus is a good example. That's a theatre company called IOU Theatre Company. They're based in another historic building within Halifax. And now they're engaging and using the Peace Hall as a stage for their work as well, which is something that they would never have done before because the partnerships weren't there to achieve it. And that sense of place, talked about place, that's especially important. But then you think, well, if culture can do it, events can do it, food can do it, and it's true. That's Blondin in the top corner. Cinema in the bottom corner, you'll see that's Tour de Yorkshire, and they've just announced they're coming back to Halifax because they had a good experience as organisers. People turned out, the whole town turned out, and that's absolutely terrific. So how can they respond and celebrate the heritage? Maybe obliquely, maybe not directly, but they can do a little bit of both, and that's certainly what they have done. So when we get to food and drink, they're attracting people to come and have Korean vegan food in a fantastic environment, and people are coming from 50 miles plus away. And the partners who want to get involved in that are coming from all over Calderdale, they're coming from all over Yorkshire, and they're coming from beyond. Word gets out quickly, and that's particularly important. And the voices that get carried through that are also particularly important. So Chowdown is an event which has happened this year. That's Leeds Independent Food and Drink Festival getting involved. They're decamping up the road, and because they just like the effect that the Peace Hall has on their events, and it's been made easy for them to do that. So broadcast is another one. A lot of people enjoyed Derry Girls recently, and despite the BBC being over in Media City, there's a huge amount of activity in Yorkshire, and little old Halifax has got all those programmes being written, produced, and made in and around Halifax. I'll not ask for a show of hands. People are quite private about their broadcast habits, but most of you will have seen one or more of those, hopefully. So broadcast can help shape image and help reposition before anything else is done. And the location scouts are certainly pretty active in and around Halifax, including the Peace Hall, to see what can be done there. Now, online's important, and last week I was in a room with 15, 20 people looking at how everybody comes together to make the visitor journey online work even harder. There's a lot of quick wins that could be had there. And this